Any other comments before we...
Like as in...
Yeah.
Well brought up. Too bad.
Damn right.
Yeah.
Good push.
Warning, this podcast contains violence, sexuality, gore, and other horrible and disturbing things. Listener discretion is advised. Also, the hosts of this venture are ignorant dipshits, so please do not take anything they say as fact. And enjoy the show.
Now, are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then we'll begin.
Today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be.
It is our basic human right to be fucked up.
A second plane now has crashed into the other tower of the World Trade Center.
Putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
The defendant shall be incarcerated for the rest of her natural life with no possibility of parole.
You are not machines. You are not cattle. You are men.
We were somewhere around Barstow, on the edge of the desert, when the drugs began to take hold.
Occultae Veritatis.
Hello, listeners. I am Richard Bigley, and in studio I have...
Sage Murray.
Leon Felger.
Ood Gallifrey.
Don Kessler, hi.
LEB.
So has anyone here ever heard of Area 51?
Yes.
Yeah.
We did an episode
on it, yeah.
Well, if the listeners want to learn more about Area 51, listen to episode 16. You can listen to it once if you want, or twice, 3 times, 5 times, as many times as you want. None of us here will judge you for it.
Nope. Yeah.
But this episode is not about Area 51.
Can I just say that the Area 51 episode was one of my worst episodes?
No, everyone's going to go back
will
and
judge you
listen
for listening to it 5 times.
It was episode 16.
Yep.
That's what I said.
Did anyone make good episodes past before 20?
Probably not.
My first Apollo Soyuz test project was pretty good.
I haven't made any good episodes, so...
Yeah, neither have I. Don't feel bad.
But if you want to learn about another CIA operation similar to Area 51 or Guantanamo Bay, stick with me, dear listener, as we're about to talk about Pine Gap. But in order to do that, like any good first date, you gotta go a little down under. But first, some poison.
So, what's your poison? So on my script, I wrote, "Can we get Fosters?" But apparently, we don't get Fosters.
It's okay. When we do the Emu War episode, we'll get Fosters.
So we got Cooper's instead, which is an Australian owned and Australian made beer, bottle fermented, family brewed. It's a pale ale. And is it a pop-off, or can I screw cap?
It's a screw cap.
It's screw cap.
I can't.
Cooper's ales and stout are naturally bottle conditioned, resulting in a characteristic fine sediment forming on the base of the bottle. This sediment is completely natural and can be gently mixed before drinking, or poured carefully, leaving the sediment in the bottle.
And because Leon's a recovering alcoholic, he's drinking Budweiser Zero, which is a full-flavored zero alcohol beer, and it's pretty damn good.
This is really sweet. It tastes like juice.
It is.
It smells like beer.
It is sweet. I like this, actually.
Bud Zero wins every time. I mean, it loses to Heineken Zero, which is a better non-alcoholic beer, but this is pretty good.
The Cooper's has a nice fine sediment in the bottom, or it could be pulp, I guess.
Juicy bits.
Juicy bits.
Juicy bits.
If you're from the United Kingdom, I guess.
Or more like sandy bits.
Sandy bits?
Those hurt. Don't do those.
I wonder if this wasn't carbonated, would I feel the sediment on my tongue? But I think the carbonation makes it so I don't feel the sediment on my tongue.
I don't think we've really got to the sediment yet. Just
yeah,
give me
we haven't gotten to the sediment, I don't think. You have to kind of drink the whole bottle.
It can be a goopy gulp at the bottom.
Before the Second World War, all
gulp?
beer had sediment like this. You couldn't get clean beer. I know because my old buddy, who's now deceased, Dan Murphy, who died at the age of 98, used to complain about current beer not having the sediment in it because he said before the war you could only get beer with sediment, and then they started filtering it or some shit like that, and it's never been the same.
Oh.
So
well, it's cool because like it ferments in the bottle, so like it carbonates. Like the carbonation isn't like added through any sort of chemical process other than the fermentation of the beer. You know, they're not like trying to inject carbon dioxide into it.
So it's like beer pop.
It's kind of like a beer pop, yeah. No, this is a good beer. I like it. I'll
Yeah,
give it
this is
like an 8. 8 out of 10.
Yeah, this is a nice, easy drinking beer. I can imagine this in the Australian outback being very refreshing. I give it 5 non-disappointing pre-World War II beers out of 5.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. It's a good beer.
It kind of feels like somebody's like punching you in the back of the tongue with like a stanky dick. Like
That's like the opposite of what I think.
Yeah, it's got quite a flavor punch.
I don't want to think about why I like this now.
Stanky dick, eh?
Stanky Dick Throat
Stanky Dick.
Punch is the name of my grindcore band.
Stinky dick throat punch.
Yep.
Any other comments before we...
Like as in...
Yeah.
Well brought up. Too bad.
Damn right.
Yeah.
Good push.
A former intelligence worker has lifted the lid on some of his top secret work in Australia.
What goes on at Pine Gap? Sometimes referred to as Australia's Area 51, Pine Gap is considered one of the country's most secretive and strategically important sites and sits on the outskirts of Alice Springs.
Obviously, I had no idea there was a CIA base in Australia. United States is crazy, dude. How are we gonna have like this big area in the middle of Australia? They've got like a central park down here with a pool. Like, you couldn't write a science fiction novel without having known all this stuff. That is more crazy than real life.
I was going to say, those big old white satellites that sticking up out of the ground, they look pretty intimidating. They look pretty suspicious, to say the least. And, man, if they're really taking that much data, where are they taking it from? You know, like, how big of a radius we talking about here?
Residents of Queensland are going about their business when this tears open the sky. Twin bright streaks, making this a peculiar video even by today's UFO standards.
What the f*** is that? What the hell is it? That is insane. Look, it's just disappeared.
Hundreds report seeing these streaking objects, and some suspect they are somehow connected to a secret base almost 1,000 miles away.
It's alleged that there is a lot of experimentation and dark technology that has gone on there.
It's kind of like some of the famous, secretive places in the U.S., like Los Alamos and White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico come to mind, Nellis, Area 51 in Nevada, things like that.
There's so much going on at this place, and this is just a little glimpse they give us on TV. What the fuck is really happening there? What are they really doing there,
This channel is based on this military base that's here in South Australia. They're doing all these weird tests over there. Like, you should see some of this footage. It is fucking awesome. And there's these weird sounds that keep getting recorded as well.
Strange sound of it.
So, do you know where there's like a military experiment place?
It's about a kilometre north of here.
Okay. Have you heard the sounds?
Well, only when the sounds are on, they'll tell you the dates.
Oh, listen, I've seen this in the video. I've seen this place in the videos. These lights go red when they're experimenting, and when they're red, you're not allowed on the beach.
Pine Gap is a top-secret American base in the Australian outback that we know tracks and spies on satellites. Many also believe it conceals an underground city where scientists develop a wide variety of clandestine projects involving UFOs. There are numerous stories of flying discs appearing in the sky over the base, and it's rumored to contain a plasma gun capable of shooting down anything in low orbit.
Well, it's a very high-tech facility. When you go into operations, you walk into a dark room, you see operators there looking at their monitors. They wear headsets. They're basically monitoring, watching, and listening for anything that might be intelligence that would be desired by the United States and Australia.
So let's talk Australia. I guess it's a country beside New Zealand if you're fallen victim to the hoax that is the New Zealand actually exists.
I don't believe you're there, Papa. Fuck off.
Yeah. So as we all know and is well established, New Zealand is a hoax by Big Geography in order to sell more continents. But never mind about that. Let's talk definitely not fictional Australia. If you find the middle of it and put a pin in the map, that's probably Pine Gap. Right dead center in Australia.
Neat.
So this is a CIA base. Now, some of y'all might be like, why is there a CIA base in the middle of Australia? And the answer, my friends, is, as always, U.S. imperialism.
That is exactly what I was thinking.
I guess that's my episode. You can turn it off now, or maybe you can go for a walk or say hi to your kids or whatever. Or if you want, you can keep listening. Maybe we'll talk about UFOs. I don't know.
You said hi to your kids yesterday. It's fine.
Oh, it's fine. Okay. There you go. See on the map on the screen there.
Oh, it's super close to Alice Springs. And Alice Springs is the dopest place in Australia.
Is it?
I sent a couple of our podcast stickers to City Hall in Alice Springs and asked them to put it on a garbage can and take a photo of it and send it to us.
Did they?
They did not. Or they haven't yet, but I mean, Australia is far away, so sometimes it takes a while for mail to get there.
Like a year ago?
Yeah, it was about a year ago.
Yeah, okay.
Well, it was April of this year. Can I throw in a space fact?
Sure.
So when Apollo 11, which was the first mission to land people on the moon, was in space, it had landed on the moon. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were inside the lunar module, and the NASA was planning a live televised event for when they stepped off the lunar module. They were supposed to get 8 hours of sleep while they were on the moon before they got out of the capsule and went for a walk around. But they were so excited when they arrived on the moon that they told NASA ground control, we're going out now. Fuck this sleep. That was bad, though, because one of their ground tracking stations in Australia near Alice Springs had broken down, and they were trying to fix it. And without this ground tracking station in Australia, there would be no live broadcast from the moon, and it would have fucked everything up. In the end, they got it fixed just in the nick of time and were able to record live video of Aldrin and Armstrong landing and walking on the moon.
Cool.
Second fun fact, there is a place just outside of Pine Gap called Wallace Rock Hole.
Oh, Wallace, you're rock hole.
Yeah.
Hooray.
It depends on which Wallace.
Do kangaroos have opposable thumbs?
I don't know. Never seen a kangaroo.
I've always wanted to go to Australia. Is Pine Gap like a place that I would want to go to? Or is it basically
maybe
inaccessible?
Alice Springs you'd want to go to.
Alice Springs
I
is
don't
really
think you
nice.
could really get into Pine Gap legally.
Ah.
And if you could, then maybe you should be doing this episode.
Well, if the raid on Area 51 was such a blazing success, why don't we...
A raid on Pine Gap.
Pine Gap, yeah.
I do not think kangaroos have opposable thumbs.
Okay.
They have some wicked claws, though.
Claws could handle a sticker.
Is Pine Gap one of those places where if you cross some line, some guy in a pickup truck will point a gun at you?
Yeah, sort of like that. There's
Okay.
some signage on the road into Pine Gap if you wanted to throw it up or look at it.
That's a weird subgenre of YouTube. Like, people, like, towing over the line of Area 51 to see what the military will do.
Just there you go.
No through road. Joint Defense Facility, Pine Gap. Prohibited area. Turn around now. Sorry. No through road, crikey.
You call that a knife? This is a knife.
I see you've played Knifey Spoony before.
Dollary dues.
Close Pine Gap! Win the world! Close Pine Gap!
Franz Darling and his fellow peace activists had been demonstrating at the base entrance, but took it a step further and entered the base to disrupt its work.
There are people now in this community that are willing to walk across lines in pursuit of peace and justice.
We want to close the gap!
There's a long history of protests at Pine Gap. In the 80s, 700 women entered the top secret base, with some physically removing the gates. They were charged with trespassing, a relatively minor crime. But these protesters faced a much tougher national defence law, which could have seen them go to jail for up to 7 years.
Were we not to have the defence facility at Pine Gap operational, our intelligence and operational capability would be significantly degraded.
John Blaxland is a former head of intelligence for the Australian Defence Force and one of the few who have actually been privy to what goes on behind the razor wire at Pine Gap.
I think the Attorney-General is particularly mindful of minimising the risk of further such revelations that would be harmful. So providing disincentives for protesters to want to disrupt the facility, I can see why he would jump to that conclusion.
Today, Justice John Reeves decided against sending any of the 6 protesters to jail. They were fined more than $15,000, raising questions about why the Commonwealth went to the expense of trying them under the Defence Act.
So, in 1966, there was a treaty between the U.S. and Australia called the Australian Treaty Series 1966 Number 17. That's sort of like the middle length name. The short name is ATS 17, but there's an even longer name, and the longer name is Agreement between the Government of the Commonwealth of Australia and the Government of the United States of America relating to the establishment of a joint defense space research facility.
I hate
Jesus Christ.
Just rolls off the tongue.
It just rolls off the tongue, exactly.
Why would anyone bother shortening that name?
Not even an acronym for that?
Well, it's just ATS 17 if you want like the short.
No, I want to know the long names acronym.
Oh, fuck, I don't know. ABTGOTCO. Never fucking mind. I'm done with that. So get it. They're just doing space research. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You know, just a couple of buds hanging out, doing some space research during the Cold War.
It's like you do.
You know, overseen by the CIA.
Yeah.
Definitely not used for spying or anything.
No.
So this space research facility is Pine Gap. Basically, they pitched it to the Australian public as just a space research facility. You know, and who doesn't like space research? It sounds fun.
I love space research.
Yeah.
Actually, the space photos that come out of Australia are so brilliant.
Because there's nothing in Australia.
Yeah.
There's nothing I love more than spacing out in the Australian outback with the boys.
Yeah. Sydney Opera House is just a plastic model shot at an angle to make it look big.
No, but I mean, like, Alice Springs is in the fuck all middle of nowhere. Like, it's a dark sky preserve where you can go and see the universe.
Damn.
So the operations on the base started in 1970. There were 400 American families that just up and moved to Australia. So Wikipedia cites Linda Ann Blanchard and Leah Chan that there are 38 radomes, which a radome is like, it's like a radar dish, but instead of being like a satellite dish, it's just a big giant dome. So it's like a sphere instead of a radar dish. The geography of the location of the space is kind of interesting because satellites in orbit need a line of sight to be the most effective in communication with their ground bases. That's why satellites from the US spend a lot of time over the US. Satellites from China spend a lot of time over China, that sort of thing, so that they can communicate, with ground base. You know, if you're the US military industrial complex and you need to communicate with the US, but your satellites are, say, spying over the Middle East, you don't really got that line of sight. And that's where Pine Gap comes in.
So Pine Gap is a satellite ground control site used to intercept electronic signals using satellites, and most of those signals are actually associated with weapons testing and communication systems. So any country that might manufacture weapons that could be used against the United States, Australia, and our allies would of course be heavily targeted by the Pine Gap satellites. Now, some Australians, if you're not in the intelligence community, you might actually think, well, Pine Gap is led by the United States only. That's actually not true. Pine Gap is a jointly led ground site. It means that we have a chief there who's an American and a deputy chief who's an Australian. But the Pine Gap satellites are basically giant umbrellas. They're giant parabolic-shaped antennas in space. But what I can also tell you is they are some of the most sophisticated pieces of military hardware ever created by the United States government. They are very, very effective at intercepting signals either located on the Earth's surface or from within Earth's atmosphere. So why Pine Gap? Of all things you'd want to build, why would you want to build the satellites? Why would you want to build a place like a Pine Gap in Alice Springs? To answer that question, you need to think back to the 1960s, back when the Soviet Union is the enemy of the United States. The Soviets, of course, have nuclear weapons. The spread of communism in the 1960s was, of course, very, very real. And the U.S., of course, wants to maintain military superiority over the Soviets. So the U.S. reasoned, of course, that if it had satellites in orbit that were able to intercept electronic signals transmitting out of the western part of the Soviet Union and transmit them down to a ground site where those signals could be analyzed, interpreted, and reported to the U.S. intelligence community, that the U.S. would have an intelligence edge over the Soviets. So why Alice Springs? Of all places on Earth, why would you want to put the ground site in Alice Springs? It's a good question, isn't it? To answer that question, think back to the 1960s when the world was very different, and of course Australia was and is a trusted ally of the United States. Both countries are signatories to the ANZUS Pact of 1951, so there is a security agreement in place between the two countries, both in writing and in spirit. Look at the location as well of Australia. It is located on the same geographic side of the globe as the Soviet Union, right? It's simply located in the southern hemisphere. So from Australian soil, you can look up above the equator, see a satellite sitting there that can simultaneously look into the western part of the Soviet Union and intercept electronic signals and beam them down to the ground site. From the continental United States, you have a totally different type of geometry because the U.S. is on the other side of the globe. You cannot see satellites sitting above the equator that can simultaneously see inside the western part of the Soviet Union from the continental United States. So the U.S. had to look for a suitable ground site for their satellites. If you transmit it down to an isolated part of Australia where very, very few people live, the beam is containing all this data is less likely to be intercepted by an adversary. Look at security, okay? Alice Springs was and is an isolated town with a low population. And if there's one thing the NSA loves, it's isolation around their ground sites. They don't want anybody snooping around where they're eavesdropping and picking up foreign intelligence signals, right?
According to the Nautilus Institute, there's, quote, 9 geosynchronous SIG-INT, which is signals intelligence, satellites have been operated by Pine Gap over the past 45 years. Many of these satellites have exhibited amazing longevity. So definitely spy satellites.
Yeah.
The other point about this base being like smack dab in the middle of Australia is that it stops spy ships from snooping. So it's kind of hard to like take a look at what your enemy's doing from a boat and in the water there if they're in the middle of a continent.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to look out for spy Land Rovers.
Double agent kangaroos, maybe?
Yeah.
Maybe a poisonous spy spider?
I like that. That
Yeah.
sounds really cute.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Little truth serum.
Yeah, it looks like the closest coast to Pine Gap is somewhere around the 900-kilometer mark.
Yeah.
So what kind of shit did they get up there at that base? Well, for starters, in the Cold War, they used to gather intelligence about the Soviet missile program. In October 26, 1978, the Australian Senate Hansard, Victor Marchetti, former executive assistant to the deputy director of the CIA, is quoted as saying the Rhyolite satellite program was capable of, quote, sucking up like a vacuum cleaner a wide spectrum of Soviet and Chinese military communications and radar transmissions and beaming them back down to Pine Gap.
That's what she specializes in.
Yeah.
So, pop quiz hotshot. Where are all of the National Reconnaissance Office's satellites launched from?
Your butt.
I was literally just going to say that.
I bet you it's the Earth.
I bet you it's the Earth, yeah. My money's on the Earth.
I bet they launch it on land, not from underwater. Yeah.
So the answer is actually the Vandenberg Space Force Base in California.
Vandenberg Space Force Base.
Yeah.
I should have known that.
Is it on land?
It is on land.
Oh, I was right.
Nailed it.
Is that on Earth?
Yes, it is.
Fuck
Is
yeah.
Is it from your butt?
Sometimes.
There we go.
So as time went on, it basically served American interests in the Pacific, Asia, and the Middle East. According to John Pilger, Australian journalist and documentary filmmaker, Australia pleaded to join the U.S. in its invasion of Vietnam and provided, quote, black teams to be run by the CIA. In the 1970s, Australia's 21st Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam.
Gough?
Gough.
Gough?
G-O-U-G-H. Gough.
That's pronounced go.
No, that's Gough.
It's go.
No, ask any Aussie. It's Gough Whitlam.
Hold on, 21st Prime Minister?
Yes. It's Gough Whitlam.
Like
I hope it's golf because I
or
like
trough. Or sloth.
Did I fucking call it or what?
I don't know yet. Give me a fucking...
Crikey, I fucking called it, mate.
I'm gonna have to come back to this because I'm gonna have to dig a bit. Oh.
What?
Oh. Fuck. No. Shit. No. What? So, the
Gough Whitlam, there you go.
American pronunciation.
Gough Whitlam.
Fuck, what did I tell you?
And the British
fucking
pronunciation.
told
Gough Whitlam.
Oh.
See, it's still Gough. Either way, in British or American, it is Gough Whitlam.
Like it doesn't have Australian.
I concede
But there's no
defeat.
Australian pronunciation.
I also concede defeat.
Yeah.
Look, let me finish this Cooper's
Gough
off, and I'll give you
Whitlam.
the Australian one.
Yeah.
So anyway, this guy, he throws a big fucking wrench into the whole American machine. See, he didn't want his country to be like a servant to American interests anymore. And among other things, he drafted the first Aboriginal lands rights legislation in Australia.
Oh, it's just kind of based.
Yeah, kind of based.
Gough is a Welsh name, and it is a nickname for someone with red hair.
Did Gough Whitlam have red hair?
It looks pretty gray, but he was also elderly, I think.
Is that like the Goffs in high school?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So now, as any
You'll
Latin
never understand
American
my
country
Pan-American
can tell
military
you-
complex.
Now, as any Latin American country can tell you, when you try to buck the American control over your country and its policies and resources, you end up with a CIA coup on your doorstep. So, like, say...
Coup.
Yeah, definitely
fuck.
coup.
Yeah, okay. Now, as any Latin American country can tell you, when you try to buck the American control over your country and its policies and resources, you end up with a CIA coup on your doorstep. In Chile, democratically elected leader Salvador Allende was murdered and then replaced with friend of the pod Augusto Pinochet. Now, instead of being...
Shout out Augie.
What?
So now, instead of being a Latin American country, this was Australia. For a change of pace, Whitlam's ministers would publicly condemn the U.S. bombing of Vietnam as, quote, corrupt and barbaric. A CIA station officer in Saigon had said, quote, we were told the Australians might as well be regarded as North Vietnamese collaborators.
Holy.
Damn.
Because they just don't want...
Because they don't want the CIA running a fucking base in the middle of their country.
I mean, if the Australian president was like, hey, crikey, mate, can we put a kangaroo facility in the middle of... I'm sure the Americans have a problem with it.
To represent the people of Australia, we wish to present to you a petition signed by them to the Chief of the Pine Gap facility, Mr. Richard Kruger, and I'll now read out the petition. We, the undersigned Australian people, demand the removal of the CIA NSA Pine Gap base and all other foreign military installations on our soil. We also demand that all foreign security organisations and their personnel be withdrawn from Australia. These bases and their security networks threaten Australia's security, safety and independence. And on behalf of the Australian people, I present this petition to you to give to the head of the Pine Gap base.
I'll see it is 11.
What do we want? US bases out. When do we want it? No! What do we want? US bases out. When do we want them? No! What do we want? US bases out. When do we want it? No! What do we want? US bases out. When do we want it? No!
Vice President George Bush on the presidential campaign trail. After 8 long years, a heartbeat away from the top job, he is now at last himself the headline.
It all boils down to our ability to lead in the free world. My conviction that we are the fairest, most decent, most generous nation on the face of the earth.
The man who may yet have his finger on the button will insist that he have lots of firepower to call on.
I did have a chance to make the first contact for the United States with this new leader of the Soviet Union. There's no question that he's stylistically different and generationally different, but the Soviets remain a powerful, a determined adversary, willing to press any advantage whenever and wherever they perceive weakness. And really, they do only respect strength.
Washington insiders call him the Velcro vice president. Everything Reagan does sticks to Bush, like the current scandal over the White House being run according to the stars.
Of folly.
Tell me where you stand on astrology.
I'm a Gemini. How do I know? Because I looked it up in the newspapers the other day.
Like Reagan, Bush has a reputation for putting his foot in his mouth. As if to prove the point, this ex-director of the CIA made a startling admission on the matter of US bases in Australia.
Does the Australian Aboriginal word Narunga mean anything to you?
No.
Pine Gap, then?
Who?
Pine Gap?
Pine Gap. Not particularly, but I've heard the name before, I think.
The CIA station in the centre of Australia.
That's why I've heard of it.
Are they
Pine Gap
stations of any moment in your view?
You know something? I learned something I forgot to tell you before this interview. Anybody that took the oath of office to protect sources and methods of intelligence took it, as far as I'm concerned, for life. And thus I don't discuss sensitive relationships with other countries of any kind, even though there's been some of this debated in the public domain.
As you can see, Pine Gap kind of became a matter of contention. Whitlam wanted to know what the fuck was going on at Pine Gap. In speaking to John Pilger, Victor Marchetti, the CIA officer who had helped set up Pine Gap, had basically told him, quote, this threat to close Pine Gap caused apoplexy in the White House. A kind of chilly coup was set in motion.
They're acting like it's like some big affront that they want them out of their country.
Like a pigeon soup.
Chili Coo is the name of my Arctic Monkeys cover band.
Chili Coo sounds sort of like a canned soup or something.
It does.
Yeah. Is it like a Manhattan coup or a New England coup?
Now, everyone knows that New England clam chowder is better than Manhattan clam chowder.
Boo.
I don't know the difference.
Did they put
One's
chili
tomato
willy
and one's
in the
dairy
soup?
based.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
New England's creamy.
Yeah. Manhattan is tomatoey.
Clam is another term for vagina.
Oh.
It's true.
Interesting.
Just ask Cloister. They knew what they were doing.
They did. They do what they're doing.
Clammy balls.
So, to respond to Whitlam shaking the American intelligence apparatus in 1974, the White House sent Marshall Green to Canberra as ambassador. Now, he was known as the coup master, having been central to the 1965 coup against President Sukarno in Indonesia. By the way, this coup killed like 500,000 to 1 million people. And Green was now being sent to Australia as ambassador.
After I'd been working in Canberra, I went to Washington to work for the Financial Review and the National Times there. And Marshall Green, who had been the ambassador during the Whitlam years, I spoke to him and I said, well, what was your real job there? He said, well, there are 3 goals. One, which was the most important of all, that we kept our facilities there, by which he meant the intelligence facilities and the Northwest Cape submarine communications base. That was by far the most important, followed by keeping Australia open to foreign investment from America, and thirdly, and not so important, was getting us to put up our hands at the UN and other forums whenever the Americans wanted us to. So nothing has changed in that regard. There's no doubt whatsoever that the intelligence gathering facilities here are the most important asset that the US has here, and it's far more important than whether or not we contribute a couple of thousand troops to the next American war or something, even though I think Australians see it, there's a war coming up, we better contribute some troops, or some of them do, or a lot of them do, or governments do. But we are contributing massively because Pine Gap has a particular focus on China now.
In 1975, Whitlam discovered that Britain's MI6 was operating against his government. MI6 was decoding secret messages being sent to Whitlam's Foreign Affairs Office. Clyde Cameron, a minister under Whitlam's government, had said, quote, "We knew MI6 was bugging cabinet meetings for the Americans."
Oh.
That's a pretty simple quote.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we knew.
We knew, yeah.
We were there.
So at the time, the Governor General of Australia, Governor General is basically the Queen's representative as head of state in a Commonwealth country, for those who do not necessarily have Governor Generals in your state apparatus.
Governors General.
Damn it.
Governors General, okay.
It's like cul-de-sac.
Cul-de-sac.
It's not cul-de-sacs.
Yeah, you're beckoning the sack.
I'll call your sack.
Governor General is Governors General.
Here, boy.
The past tense of Governors General is Governors General.
So the Governor General at the time, Sir John Kerr, had strong ties to American intelligence. And so, well, with the CIA being shaken by Whitlam on November 11th, 1975, Kerr invoked an archaic vice-regal, quote, reserve powers to basically end the term of the prime ministership of the democratically elected prime minister.
What the fuck?
That's sketchy.
Yeah, just went in there and said, no, you're done.
Thanks, but no thanks.
That's enough of that cut.
Then he commissioned the leader of the opposition, Malcolm Fraser, of the Liberal Party, as prime minister. So it'd be like in Canada, the Governor General being like, no, sorry, Justin Trudeau, you're no longer prime minister. We're now appointing Pierre Poilievre as your prime minister.
Gross.
Then the opposition leader, Mr. Fraser, decided to use his numbers in the Senate to force a general election. Mr. Whitlam refused to call for a double dissolution. His government should stay in office because of its majority in the lower house. Neither leader would back down.
So must Sir John Kerr accept your advice, whatever advice you give?
Unquestionably, the Governor-General takes the advice from his Prime Minister and from no one else.
And must act on that advice?
Unquestionably, the Governor-General must act on the advice of his Prime Minister.
Then came Remembrance Day, November the 11th, 1975. After meetings with both leaders, the Governor-General announced that he was dismissing Mr. Whitlam and appointing Mr. Fraser as caretaker Prime Minister until a general election decided the issue. An angry Mr. Whitlam responded to his sacking in a speech on the steps of Parliament House.
Well may we say, God save the Queen. Because nothing will save the Governor-General. The proclamation, which you have just heard read by the Governor-General's official secretary, was countersigned Malcolm Fraser. Who will undoubtedly go down in Australian history from Remembrance Day 1975 as Kerr's Kerr.
Of course, no scandal of this size is complete without its conspiracy theories. And one of the big ones is whether, of course, the American intelligence had any role to play in prompting Sir John Kerr to do what he did. There were concerns from the very outset of the Whitlam government. Whitlam himself didn't want his ministerial staff to be security vetted by ASIO. New Attorney General Lionel Murphy, searching for information to corroborate his theory that there were Croatian terrorists intending on assassinating the visiting Prime Minister of Yugoslavia, raided the headquarters of ASIO in Melbourne with police in tow, looking for information to prove his theory that ASIO had been complicit or negligent in its duties. If an Attorney General could barge in like that without giving any forewarning to his own Director General about his intentions, what next was going to happen? Subsequently, there was concern about Pine Gap. Pine Gap had been built in the late 1960s under very secret conditions. And at that stage, in the mid-1970s, it was not public knowledge what was going on there. And the Prime Minister was on the cusp of revealing details about this facility in the middle of Australia. A couple of days before the dismissal itself, the ASIO liaison officer in Washington is called in by his American counterparts for what is effectively a démarche. Ted Shackley speaks to the ASIO representative and says, you've got to do something. This is deeply worrying. What did ASIO know? What did ASIO do?
Well, like, we're in the middle of Canada, so imagine, like, America set up a little base in the middle of Saskatchewan, and then we were like, hey, can you fuck off?
It's
And
called
then,
the Primrose Lake Air Weapons Range. They have a base.
like, imagine we wanted to kick them out, and the Governor General just changed our Prime Minister because we didn't want to play along.
I mean, it's kind of like when the Prime Minister prorogues Parliament, and they're just like, you know what, no more Parliament for you, and everyone's like, aw, shucks.
Mhm.
Damn it, how do we, next time, Did you know that 4 prime ministers before the prime minister we have been talking about was Harold Holt? Harold Holt is notable for having gone swimming, disappeared in the ocean and drowned, and to commemorate him, they named a swimming pool in Melbourne after him.
Delicious.
Fucking Australians.
Yeah.
That's how we know they're not real.
Yeah.
Do you remember when Stephen Harper first prorogued Canadian Parliament and the most searched word on Google in Canada was prorogued?
I don't remember
No one
Stephen
knew
Harper.
Yeah, it was like a small potato-filled pastry.
He was a big potato-filled pastry.
In the 1980s, senior CIA officers revealed that the Whitlam problem had been discussed with urgency by the CIA's director, William Colby, and the head of MI6, Sir Maurice Oldfield. A deputy director of the CIA had said that, quote, Kerr did what he was told to do. So there you go. It's kind of like a soft coup of the Australian government in the 70s, orchestrated by the CIA.
That's fucked.
Yeah. So, according to the Sydney Morning Herald in 1985, Defense Minister Kim Beazley said that Pine Gap does not do domestic spying on Australians, stating, quote, we say emphatically, whatever, fuck it. I can't speak.
Okay.
Too many Coopers.
Mm-hmm.
That the facilities do not spy on Australia. Saying Pine Gap's role was to help verify arms control agreements and provide adequate early warning of missile launches. Beazley also said that the Australian government is aware of everything that happens at that base. However, there's a security expert, Des Ball.
Is that like D's nuts?
D's nuts, Des Balls.
Professor Beasley does these balls.
These balls. So the cable refers to Ball's comments, saying there were at least 2 areas of the facility where Australian nationals are not permitted entry, the U.S. National Communication and Cipher Room, and the Key Room, where they, the Americans, do final analysis of all incoming intelligence. Next to this on the typed cable is a handwritten note. Correct, but Hayden, when Shadow PM, did enter the area once. So how does a minister know everything going on at a base where there are at least, I guess, 1 room, perhaps 2, where no one from your own country are allowed in?
That's fucked.
Shrug emoji.
Yeah, okay.
Victor Marchetti was the special assistant to the director of the CIA and was one of the men behind the Pine Gap Agreement.
We had already developed electronic satellites for picking up all kinds of radio signals and other emissions. It was just put a stationary satellite up there, the one that orbits with the Earth, some 20-some thousand miles above the Earth, and make it like a vacuum cleaner. Just suck up every conceivable thing that you, from microwave, or anything that, on any frequency that may be of value, just suck it up and then send it down with a pencil beam to a down station, such as the place at Pine Gap, and then process it and see what you can learn.
Did the Aussies, as you call them, know what was going on at that time?
Oh, sure. Of course. I told you. As I explained to you, as the project would begin to develop, the Australians would be brought into it.
Were they told exactly what
they'd be told what we're going to do and why it would be of interest to them and of value to them. Now, nobody tells anybody everything. I mean, it's the nature of the business is that you never completely trust anyone and they never completely trust you. I mean, that's just the nature of the business. And there are cases where there will be mutual operations going on, and Not only will the CIA be withholding information from their allies, they'll be trying to recruit some of the people in their, among their allies to work for them.
What was the aim of Pine Gap?
The primary aim was to collect electronic information on Soviet missile activities in eastern Siberia and Chinese missile activities, everything from testing to operational systems, and on the Chinese in northern China, and any other related military information that could be picked up, or any other general intelligence information.
See, I was told that it was a space research facility, joint facilities.
Well, that was the cover.
That's what all Australians were told.
Yeah, well, that was the cover for it at the time. At the time, it was considered a very sensitive operation. Not so much to keep the Soviets or the Chinese from knowing what we were doing, because obviously the Soviets are very good at this. They can see that thing up there. They know what it is, and so they can put two and two together and say, well, the Americans have figured out a new way of spying on us. And we got to, if we don't already have it, we better get one too, so we can use it on them. And so the Soviets know what's going on. They don't say anything. I mean, that's the way the game is. The main reason for the secrecy was to keep the Australian and the American public ignorant, particularly the Australian public, because Australians are perceived by the Americans to be a little odd about some of these things. They sometimes don't appreciate the great threat that the Soviet Union and China and communism pose to the United States and the rest of the free world, including Australia. So we have to, like a big brother to a little brother, we have to protect them from themselves. What the Australian public doesn't know won't hurt them. I mean, there are very few things that are really so sensitive that you have to keep them secret from your own people.
You were telling a lie.
Well, yes, that's what cover is.
That's Americans saying that too, though. It's not like they have a history of being truthful about their foreign affairs. There was no war crimes. Okay, there was a couple, but it was just a few war crimes.
It was light war crimes.
Okay, we blew up a hospital. It was just one
torture.
hospital.
It was enhanced interrogation.
We're not really doing too much, but we will replace your head of state if you do not follow along with it.
Seen the video of Christopher Hitchens getting waterboarded voluntarily?
Oh, he changed his mind so quick.
Yeah, he sure did.
This is fine, I can do this. Oh, get me the fuck out of here!
That is torture. It is definitely torture.
So anyway, for the next What's Your Poison? Just a thought.
I have a complete separate thought, because for whatever reason I googled Auguste Pinochet, because fuck you, Richard Bigley.
Friend of the pod!
Augie!
There is a Les Confisiers Maitre Bonbonnières called Pinochet in Montreal. So there's a place that makes candy and it's just called Pinochet. I tried to see if Pinochet is a word in French. It's not.
That's fun.
Also, their whole website is in Comic Sans, so I don't know if they really exist.
Oh, no.
I used to work at a nursing home where when a resident would die, they would post a death notice on the main board, but they would always type them up in Comic Sans, and I just thought it was the single most inappropriate use of that font ever.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's a fucking obituary in Comic Sans.
Just hire a clown. What? Ernest is dead!
Yeah. Give me bold impact. I want people to know.
Wingdings.
Yeah.
Ariel Black. Also, Australian journalist Brian Tuhey says that, quote, claims that Pine Gap doesn't intercept Australians' phone calls, emails, faxes, and so on have all been false. And, quote, the technology dictates that these messages automatically include information about Australians, and that this interception of communications is more of a side effect, even if Australians are not the targets of their spying. So Tuhey also says, quote, I'm not saying Australian government is lying. I am saying they have been totally misled by briefings they got from the American intelligence officials. So maybe they are listening to Australian communications. Maybe they aren't. There's some question as to whether that's the case.
I'm Brian Toohey, a journalist. I'm based in Sydney now. And in the case of Pine Gap, it does it two ways. It's got satellites overhead in a stationary position or geostationary position. It's orbiting the Earth, but it's the same spot in relation to the equator, and that gives them a stable sort of platform for looking down to intercept a huge range of signals that's below it or within the footprint, and that's a very, very big area of land that's covered, so it can cover large parts of Russia, China, so forth. And of course, the other part of it, it intercepts everything that's on the particular wavelength being looked into, and that can be things like microwave phone calls and faxes and emails and everything else, videos and so forth and so on. So, and then the other side of this, what they can also do, and there's a lot of this at these different bases in Australia, including Pine Gap, where they put a satellite ground station that can listen in to one of the commercial communication stations, sending messages to and fro. So they get 30 or 40 different, these sort of satellites can be listened into from the ground stations at various parts of Australia. And so that puts us in, and what that does, the core thing that Pine Gap does, and these other bases, is feed information into the America's giant surveillance network. But the other important thing that Pine Gap does is locate targets for US military actions, into the US military machine, and also into the drone program, which is mainly run by the CIA, for attacking what they think is a terrorist site. And often in those cases, lots of innocent people get killed. They've either got the wrong person or they've used such a high amount of explosive that they kill lots of innocent bystanders. I mean, in 2013, one of the documents that is quite a long document that Snowden released was a report done by the NSA on what Pine Gap did, and it stressed that it was part of the warfighting machinery as well as the global surveillance technology, or the use of that goes into a massive database.
In more recent years, a 2013 article in The Guardian, former personnel of Pine Gap had reported that one of the base's primary functions was to locate radio signals, for example, cell phone communications in the Eastern Hemisphere, with that information being gathered and then fed into the U.S. drone program. So Human Rights Watch in Australia and Human Rights Law Center in Melbourne says that this base allegedly supplies geolocation data for airstrikes on Al-Qaeda and Taliban militants, and that it could violate international human rights law. The U.S. drone program is known for targeted drone strikes, many times killing civilians as well as their intended targets. The Bureau of Investigative Journalism has reported the following figures for U.S. drone strikes, including airstrikes, missile attacks, and ground operations from January 2004 to February 2020, have killed or injured between 10 and 20,000 civilians in Pakistan, Yemen, Afghanistan, and Somalia.
Wow.
So Pine Gap's kind of in there hanging out, giving them some data, that sort of thing.
Bit of the old murdery do.
Yeah, exactly. You find somebody, your target, you find out which SIM card their cell phone is, and you figure out, well, there's that particular phone is right there right now, and you send a drone. In July of 2013, documents released by NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden had indicated that Pine Gap Base was one of 4 locations in Australia used as part of the NSA's X-Keyscore Internet Surveillance Program. According to the documents, this allows analysts to search through vast databases containing emails, online chats, and the browser history of millions of individuals. Now, I do not want the NSA looking at my browser history.
No kidding.
Yeah.
I've Googled some weird shit. It's all for the podcast.
Furry porn, for research. It's all research.
Yeah, hours of sweaty.
Saying to me, that was all research for the podcast.
Yeah, I'm definitely on some sort of a watch list.
Yeah.
My name's Ed Snowden. I'm 29 years old. I've been a systems engineer, systems administrator, senior advisor for the Central Intelligence Agency, solutions consultant, and a telecommunications information systems officer.
Talk a little bit about how the American surveillance state actually functions. Does it target the actions of Americans?
NSA and the intelligence community in general is focused on getting intelligence wherever it can, by any means possible, that it believes on the grounds of sort of a self-certification that they serve the national interest. Originally, we saw that focus very narrowly tailored as foreign intelligence gathered overseas. Now, increasingly, we see the NSA specifically targets the communications of everyone. It ingests them by default. It collects them in its system, and it filters them, and it analyzes them, and it measures them, and it stores them for periods of time, simply because that's the easiest, most efficient, and most valuable way to achieve these ends. So while they may be intending to target someone associated with a foreign government or someone that they suspect of terrorism, they're collecting your communications to do so. Any analyst at any time can target anyone, any selector anywhere. Where those communications will be picked up depends on the range of the sensor networks and the authorities that that analyst is empowered with. Not all analysts have the ability to target everything, but I, sitting at my desk, certainly had the authorities to wiretap anyone, from you or your accountant to a federal judge to even the president if I had a personal email.
But what we're looking for at Pine Gap, of course, are threats. We're always looking for anything that might be a threat. So who's using that communication signal? Is it Saddam Hussein talking to his generals, or is it mom and dad talking to their kids? Where is the signal coming from? The ability for satellites to geolocate a signal and tell you where it's coming from today, that's very, very advanced. It's relatively quick to do. So we could tell you that, hey, that signal's coming from a friendly country. We don't have any intelligence of anything going on over here. We don't think that signal's a threat, so we're just going to make a mental note of it, and we will move on. If it's a brand new signal you've never seen before, then you would, of course, report that and document that, and anyone in the intelligence community wanting to follow that up, who's cleared for that, would of course be able to do that. The massive energy over that hopping signal is what a jammer might look like. So I, as a signals analyst, I see this. What do? I have to say to myself, has the intelligence community seen that signal before? Has it been categorized? Has it been given a name, an alphanumeric designator? Do we know about that? Or is it the first time this particular jammer has actually been seen within the intelligence community? And also, is that jammer located on an aircraft, or is it being transmitted from a ground-based platform? And is it effectively jamming that communication signal? So these are the kind of things that, as signals analysts, we would be looking at this. We would be looking at anything that might represent a threat to the military, to the civilian populations of Australia, the U.S., and, of course, our allies.
But, my dear listeners, I know you didn't really come to listen to me ramble on about the international security and intelligence apparatus and
Get
American
to the UFOs.
empire. Let's talk about some fun stuff.
Yeah.
The stuff going on that you won't find reported in leaked intelligence documents or in the mainstream media. So I
Lamestream,
went
more like.
to the only reputable source of information online, the R Conspiracy subreddit,
Fuck
and
yeah.
searched Pine Gap.
Beautiful.
So excited.
Okay.
I'm so excited for you to read a bunch of my posts from the last 2 weeks.
I heard the genetically engineered Alex Jones there.
So I'm going to would you mind doing some reading? Oh, you just got real excited there. That's like a whole post if you
All
want
right.
to read it.
1 November 2019 post reads, "So I was at school today and we had a sub, and he was a retired Air Force veteran. Me and my friends, being the curious people that we are, asked him about UFOs, Area 51, and conspiracies. But we were intrigued on the subject that he went on. He said that Area 51 is a distraction. He said Pine Gap has a runway that can fit any aircraft on Earth. He said there were, in 1976, 20,000 CIA agents underground at Pine Gap. He said that the government has already developed hypersonic planes. He said we think everything is new because the government plans 10 years ahead always. He said a bunch more, that I forget. Tell me what you think. Just food for thought.
That's it?
I was told a whole bunch of stuff and then I forgot something.
Forgot it.
Okay, so a runway that can fit any aircraft. I mean, if they're in the middle of Australia, isn't that just like a super large stretch of dirt?
Yeah.
The thing about Pine Gap is it is in between, like, I should put the map up a little bit, but it is in between like these ridges of earth, or not earth, but like rock. So you would actually need to. It'd be hard to get a good-sized runway in there.
I've got another post for Philger to read here.
A June 2020 post states government operations, quote, include a huge worldwide UFO cover-up and the building and maintaining of deep underground military bases. Acronym DUMBS, or DUMS, end quote. And then goes on to list a series of places, including Pine Gap. They go on to say, quote, these projects are being run by a secret, unelected international governing body connected to the United Nations, end quote. The post says a nuclear-powered drill is being used to make the holes to build these deep bases. The poster says he received information from a former member of the National Security Agency who, while working at one of these bases, observed, quote, rows of caged humans, tall gray aliens, and a reptilian alien.
That's my basement.
I was going to say, that's the plot of XCOM.
Okay, so it's probably just a bunch of exsanguinated kangaroos.
Could be.
And a large crocodile.
Yeah.
You want to wrap up the rest of the page?
Yep.
Yeah.
Another post is simply titled, quote, Pine Gap, bracket, Area 52, end bracket, HAARP, end quote, a reference to the, quote, high-frequency active auroral research program, end quote, which some people seem to think is a project to weaponize weather.
We should do an episode about that.
We should do an episode on this. When the fascist convoy to Ottawa encountered a snowstorm, some of them accused Trudeau of using HAARP to try and stop them by making it snow, closing highways. Fascinating stuff.
Oh, can you imagine?
Okay, so there's a HAARP program and it controls the weather.
Yeah.
Damn.
A January 2020 post states, according to inside whistleblower Corey Goody? I don't know. Millions of captured humans are traded in slavery, where many of them taken to other planets to be bartered or abused. He further explains that the mutilated bodies of killed humans are dropped and piled up in drop zones, and national security agencies have been suppressing such info from the public for long. Why would they run back to Earth to deposit the bodies that they... Just drop it in the sun. That's a bad... Anyway.
It's actually really hard.
I think this
really hard
person
to
is trying
drop
to
shit in the
cover
sun.
up their serial killer
I
activity.
think
Yeah,
so.
no kidding.
Moreover, Nazi SSP during World War II that used the captive slaves was extended with the so-called Dark Fleet. There are multiple underground bases globally which are run by the Cabal, in which captives are used for numerous purposes such as testing subjects for certain drugs and technologies. The Pine Gap is one of those bases. Disappearing kids in playgrounds, kidnapping street kids from around the world are traded into such programs and facilities run by Cabal SSP. Of the Epstein's case convoy, the underground base in his St. James Island, where multiple kids were abused and killed apart from sex trafficking. So, yeah, we sell slaves to people on other planets, to the Nazis, and apparently Epstein's in there too.
Fascinating stuff happening out of Pine Gap. Hey?
Don Kessler, we should get your lowest Dark Fleet.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Dark Fleet there is.
Dark Fleet. So, according to citizen journalist Christy Verismo on their Angel Fire hosted website, talks about what goes on at Pine Gap.
AngelErotica.com. There are rumors saying that Pine Gap has a very large nuclear facility used to power its enormous transceiver. More rumors say also high voltage, high energy plasma accelerators, possibly for power generation, a death ray, or a plasma cannon. U.S. has been carrying out continuous research into electromagnetic propulsion at Pine Gap since 1966. This was originally started in U.S. after the war. It was necessary to move this to more remote spots. Security aspects have included hypnotic and post-hypnotic keys planted in personnel prior into acceptance into the project. Apparently, Toon Pine Gap employees visiting Perth spoke of electromagnetic devices manifesting as UFOs and even alien beings at Pine Gap. Also, 3 witnesses saw a camouflage door open up within Pine Gap, and a circular metallic craft rose vertically and silently before taking off at high speed.
Those were certainly all words.
Isn't post-hypnotic just waking up again?
Yeah.
How do you inject a secret message into somebody that's just woken up? Just,
That sounds like how I feel after an ECT treatment.
Post-hypnotic.
Post-hypnotic.
Hey, kill the Prime Minister. What? Kill the Prime Minister. No. Why would...
Agent 417, the answer is apple, cup, frond, light. You know what to do.
Take that enema.
And remember, if you would like to have some post-hypnotic situations put in your head so that you can take down some world leaders, just join our Patreon.
Join our Patreon.
Excellent.
Some more fun quotes from that Angel Fire website I got for you, Don.
Oh, right on. Alrighty, so in 1973, another type of sighting involves blue, red, and gold pencil-like beams. A man camped near Pine Gap saw a vertical shaft of very bright blue light emanating from the area of the base. His binoculars showed most of the base 8 miles away. Okay.
That's a very big dick.
That's a very big binocular. 8 miles away, as well as a strange-looking object apparently hovering above it at a height he estimated to be around 1,000 feet. Firstly, he thought it was a cigar-shaped balloon. Sometimes it's just a cigar, guys. This idea quickly evaporated when the object slowly tipped to a 45-degree angle, exposing what appeared to be its top surface. The object was perfectly circular with a central dome. 1,000 feet above the base,
Probably a giant flying dick.
Right?
It's all.
It sounds like a giant flying dick.
The Pride Parade lost one of their balloons.
Yeah, you know. 1,000 feet above the base, the cartographer estimated the diameter of the disc to be a little more than half the distance between the Pine Gap base and the disc's bottom edge, making it between 600 feet in diameter. In the moonlight, the disc appeared to be a dull gray color with a slightly yellow fuzz around its edge. A thin, bright blue beam, like a rod. Sometimes it's just a rod. Slowly extended from the disc to the base. It slowly moved in a telescopic fashion from the disc and gradually extended behind the radomes.
And completely engulfed in a grapefruit.
The rug matches the carpet.
A few minutes later, the light beam retracted only to be followed by a similar blue beam slowly extending from the base to the disc, followed by a gold-colored beam which appeared very close to the blue one. After about 30 seconds, both retracted back into the base. This process continued for about 40 minutes and ended up when the disc made some rapid oscillations, lit up like a neon sign.
It's going like this.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, was it just like a police helicopter?
It might honestly be. Like, they were just tracking some speeders down the highway next to it. Disappeared in a few seconds. After he reported it, he got a grilling by some very officious? Officious, yeah, sure. People who warned him to keep silent about his experience, otherwise he would be in for some very real trouble.
Ooh.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to use these as like inspiration for my next D&D campaign. This subreddit is fantastic.
Yeah.
In 1984, 5 witnesses on a tip-off positioned themselves about 10 miles away from Pine Gap.
Probably.
Vehicles were moving around the main base, and groups of people in coveralls were gathering near the radomes. Suddenly, a bright beam of gold-colored light sprang up from the center of the radome area. This was not a pencil-like beam, but seemed to be several meters in width and extremely intense. The width of the beam appeared to remain the same, as far as it could be seen extending vertically into the sky. It looked almost solid. Long, uneven clouds developed in the clear air surrounding the beam, which, despite a breeze blowing at the time, remained stationary. The beam suddenly cut off, and a tubular cloud started to drift off to the east like a vertical vapor trail. The beam pulsed several times, and each time it did so, the cloud effect returned, even forming what looked like a series of smoke rings. They all felt extremely disturbed, even to the point of nausea.
The light penis came.
Yeah. The gold light beam shot down, and once again, the dirty-looking clouds started drifting away.
Dirty beams, clouds, cigars that aren't cigars.
No.
I'm into it.
Then, 5 star-like objects approached from the south. 4 were in a tight diamond-shaped formation, and the 5th, which looked like a cylinder, followed at a distance of about 2 miles.
How's that star-like?
It's not.
All stars are cylinders. Haven't you seen?
I must have missed it. They told me not to look directly at the sun, so I haven't.
The 4 smaller objects took up positions north, south, east, and west of the base, each moving in small circles. The white cylindrical-shaped object with a bright white halo around its center moved toward the base, reducing altitude to about 500 feet, and stopped, rocking up and down for this whole duration. Once in position, blue light beams started flashing between all 5 objects and the ground. After about 5 minutes, one of the small objects rapidly descended towards the base and appeared to land at its northern end. It remained for 17 minutes, then returned to its original position east of the base and approximately 1,000 feet from the ground. The gold light beam again emanated from the area of the radomes. This time, the small objects began to rotate around the beam and ascend vertically as if they were examining it. The 4 objects then returned spiraling down the beam and returning to their previous positions. The cloud was thickening around the light beam and looked like a long, thin ionic column. The beam was turned off, and once again, the grayish cloud broke up and drifted toward the east. In a jerking motion, the cylindrical objects started to gain altitude, stopping in proximity to the smaller objects, which had reformed their diamond-shaped formation. The group then moved off in a southerly direction and disappeared in a few seconds. The witnesses saw 7 other UFOs in the area over the next few days, and it was recorded on video.
Was it now?
Okay,
This
so
was
a
probably a Men at Work concert or something.
I was going to
that they
say
were
like
watching.
a bunch of drones and a plane landed while Pine Gap was throwing a rave.
Yeah.
I have pulled up a map here, and you can do it on the Google folks at home. Pull up Pine Gap. You can find it. It's real easy to find. There's a Google marker. I've pulled out a measuring stick to 16 kilometers, which is about 10 miles. They're at a highway, or they're literally just on the outskirts of the town of Alice Springs. That's 10 miles. Also, fun fact, if you're 10 feet in the air, you can only see about 5 miles, because past that, the curvature of the earth starts to put things behind the horizon. So, like, you kind of can't really see the radomes at 10 miles. Unless they're on, like, this ridge over here and using a telescope, like...
Where the fuck is this huge-ass runway?
I'm guessing it's this little tiny road right beside these radomes?
That's can't land any plane.
No. Or maybe this fence. Or maybe they're just talking about the fact that about 10 miles away is the Alice Springs Airport, which looks like a good-sized airport. Well, I mean, runway.
Or maybe there's a runway at the base, but you don't see it because Google or the CIA doctored the image on the Google Maps.
True.
They've created an invisible runway.
Maybe it's an invisible runway because of their like high technology with the alien collaborators.
Yeah.
Or camouflage is still a thing,
And
even
then-
without whatever color of beams you want.
Yeah.
And they're nuclear drills, because the drills we have now aren't good enough.
You can also see that they have a lagoon. That's for their poo water.
Oh, good.
It flows that way, and then it turns into the black stuff where it's good to drink again.
Oh, I thought it was like a nuclear pond.
Depending on the way that the wind is going, that could be a very unpleasant day there.
Especially since it's between these two ridges, so it probably just bounces the poo stank around.
Nice.
Who bouncing poo stank?
But it's because it's a deep underground base, they don't smell it, so it's
That's where
perfectly
the runway
fine.
is. It's deep underground.
Oh, there we go. Oh, we solved that one, everyone.
It's like the Bat Cave, where it just opens a little door and you fly the Bat car out.
Also, Bouncing Poo Stank is the name of my ska band.
Oh, I like that.
I'd listen to them.
Yeah, I guess all that is definitely 100% real, independently fact-checked and verified for sure. That's the Richard Bigley's journalistic guarantee, not an actual guarantee. So any last thoughts, comments, inquiries, outbursts about Pine Gap? Some of the stuff we read, some of the...
Pioneer Gap.
Pioneer Gap. Good one.
Okay, so they're trying to imply that these beams are like for weather control experiments or what? Because like
just
with the
general UFO freaky light show shit. I don't know. Maybe it was a Pink Floyd concert. I don't know.
I certainly hope it's a Pink Floyd concert. Like,
I don't know. The balls in some Americans, they're all like, we threw off the chains of the imperial power, and then they just became the queen themselves and started doing imperialism. And like they're doing this shit to Australia and like forcing the Australian president to be removed. Like, oh, good job, guys. You're the imperialists now. Yeah.
I think they're just really trying to.
Prime Minister.
Oh yeah, that's what I meant.
But they're American, so they would call it a president.
But they can do it because it's fine, because it's the U.S.
Yeah,
so, yeah,
and they know best.
I think they're really just trying to share the beams with Australian crackpots because the American ones are so busy with Area 51 and everything else. They really have to subcontract that out elsewhere.
Just fire up all the conspiracy theorists in Australia.
Yeah, all 6 of them.
All 6 of them. Yeah. But as you can see, listener, they got up to all sorts of shenanigans at Pine Gap. So yeah, that's that.
There's another Pine Gap in South Australia.
Oh.
It's a place where there's two small ridges, and there's pine trees in the gap between the two.
Nice.
Like it's in the middle of a park.
It's a
called the
literal
Gawler
pine
Ridges.
gap.
Gawler Ridges. Maybe this episode was supposed to be about that one. Fuck. Okay, whatever. So yeah, that's Pine Gap from a land down under, and from the Great White North, I'm Richard Bigley.
Sage Murray.
Ood Gallifrey.
Leon Felger.
The soundboard demon.
Don Kessler.
Ellie B.
And now, some Australian slang. Bathers. Broly. Coldy. In the nutty. Smoko. Thongs. Chrissy.
Cunt.
Aussie salute. Bites. Truckee. Outback. Kindy. Joey. Exy. Yaka. Oldies. Servo. Dax. What's the John Dory? Tucker. Yui. Sky Gator. Bruce. Crikey Mikey. Bounce Mouse. Mozzie. And Pash.
And Sex Pest.
I have to pee.
Playing us out this episode, we have Hugo the Poet doing a slam poem about Pine Gap and Alice Springs. This is The Gap by Hugo the Poet.
I'm departing the Northern Territory today. It's been a marvelous trip, but before I get on my way, a brief jaunt up this hillside with some thoughts to convey, communing with the falcon, lord of all she surveys, wheeling on invisible thermal signals in high echelons, tracking her prey high in the sphere of the sky above these ridges, this palisade. Any part of this topographical art is like a looking glass, and what reflects back is your face. I'm here in Alice Springs. After the desert trek, the refreshment that Alice brings is a salve for the pains, but in the gaps of the frames behind the wonderland, we can glimpse the reality of plundered land and Alice in chains, and all across the plains of the Northern Territory, the implications of this Australia project are continuing to sink in. In case anyone listening was thinking that this whole colonization process was like a long time ago, man, it's not linked with the present, then it's worth recalling 2007, when both left and right wings of the Australian mainstream threw up their hands in a collective, "Won't someone please think of the children?" They drafted a Trojan horse report called "Children are Sacred." What then followed was yet another military invasion, with Australian troops sent into Aboriginal communities to police behaviours like alcoholism, pornography, child abuse, inappropriate welfare spending. Coincidentally, all phenomena brought by the European settlement. So what they really meant by "think of the children" was, let's enter here and interfere with no consultation and treat them like children. And this invasion, was known as the Northern Territory Intervention. It had the ostensible goal of closing the gap existing between we, the immigrant majority, and the minority Aboriginal populations, to educate them, teach them English, change their way of living, reform them, basically get the Aboriginals to conform, finally fit in, stop embarrassing us by being victims, and give up this outdated notion of being Aboriginal. Assimilation. And since we're still in this, there's some statistics we have to mention. For instance, in the Northern Territory, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples make up 86% of the adult prisoner population and 96.9% of young people in detention. Incarceration rates are up 41% since the commencing of the intervention. But one thing that was achieved was to make it an awful lot easier for the federal government and corporations to force through 99-year leases for grabbing the land and the resources beneath it. See, since invasion, one thing lets you know how little we invaders thought of this land and how precious it ever was. And that is just how willing we seem to be to just sell it off. And if you cast your mind back to the late 60s, you can see a prime example of that, because that's when the Australian government signed a pact with the USA to build this base behind me, Pine Gap. Those very spheres that you can see are designed to trap all global communications in the Eastern Hemisphere, analyze them, decrypt them, and send anything interesting down the line back to the CIA for many reasons, including straight-up surveillance, keeping a tight track on the conversations everyone's having in case the populace might snap, want to fight back, and there may need to be global interventions against insurrections to hold the tide back. But one major reason to get these communications down the line stat is for imperial forces there to utilize them to track any undesirables they can find on the map, feed the coordinates to their own marksmen, and use those stats to call in Hawks, Hellfire, Assassin ordnance, and drone targeting. So from this very location here, the true vicious purpose is to be able to send flying robots overseas to carry out extrajudicial murders with inevitable collateral death when the missiles clap, including children of the families caught in the crossfires and sights. Brah! I guess those children aren't as sacred as the ones we legislate to keep locked tight in prisons and iron shacks. And these illegal, murderous drone actions and surveillance of all your private chat, that's just the part we know about Pine Gap. There's so much secrecy surrounding it that into the Mine Gap come all sorts of conspiracy theories about subterranean levels where UFOs lie trapped, that it's a base for the Greys to conspire with the lizards and hold us back. But in actual fact, there's no need for Greys and Anunnaki to load this trap. We do it to ourselves and our colonial victims by dint of apathy while rolling ever deeper into this cul-de-sac. But whether it's our blissful ignorance of original culture or this Five Eyes echelon base whose domes refract, it's within our own soul and psyche where we actually need to close the gap.
Hello, OVPOD people. It is good to be back releasing episodes on a regular basis again. Every 10 days, a new OVPOD in your podcast app on the 6th, 16th, and 26th of each month. That's right, 666. We're edgelords who cannot resist. But besides the coming back celebration, we have something else to announce. A couple members of the OVPOD team are now producing another podcast. This podcast focuses on the abuse coming from a school in our community. It is completely hosted by the students who are now grown up and pursuing a lawsuit against the school that harmed them. It is called the Legacy of Abuse podcast. Here's the intro. Find it on any podcast app.
This podcast contains descriptions and stories of child sexual, physical, emotional, and spiritual abuse. The purpose of this podcast is to provide a therapeutic experience for former students to share their stories and educate the public. These stories have not been proven in court. stories of abuse, and our experiences from dozens of former students.
They were abused at Saskatoon's Legacy Christian Academy and adjacent Mile 2 Church.
The alleged abuses are, of course, horrific.
Solitary confinement, psychological manipulation, and rituals such as exorcisms.
Mile 2 Church employees engaged in sexual relationships with students.
They spanked the 16-year-old repeatedly to cast out his gay demons.
Whenever they spank us, they pray with us, and it's like it's out of love. It's weird and creepy.
This church and school exhibits all the hallmarks of what we often think of as a cult.
The staff tried to physically and psychologically break me. Despite their best efforts, they were not successful.
There you are. Legacy of Abuse. Find it wherever podcasts are. I'll see you on the 6th day of next month for some more interesting bullshit. Ta-ta.